Welcome to Parent Coaches Unleashed with Carrie and Jessica, where no topics are taboo or off limits. Join us as we let loose and discuss the real, raw feelings about parenting.
In each episode, we will bring you heartfelt discussions, real-life stories, and special guests that will both entertain you and encourage community so no one feels alone in their parenting journey.
Thanks so much for listening. Now let's start the show.
Hi, everybody. So Carrie and I really pride ourselves on trying to find relevant topics to talk about. And recently, we've been hearing a lot about college acceptances or deferrals or flat out rejections. And we thought, what a perfect time to have on a college advisor to help us through this whole process.
Yeah, so I'd like to welcome today Jen McKenzie. She is the owner of Milestone College Prep, and I met Jen 10 years ago as I hired her for helping my two boys when they were in high school. I believe first with some course selection and then with college applications and so forth. So welcome, Jen. We are so excited during this busy season for you that you're taking time to be with us today.
Hi,
So
Jen.
we want to hop right in.
Well, hi. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very happy to be here. I think the timing is perfect because we are sort of just coming into the season where decisions are coming in. I know seniors are making plans for next year and juniors are starting to think about what the future holds for them. So it's perfect timing. So I appreciate being here.
Yes, well, thank you. And I actually have a question surrounding this decisions coming in. Last week was a big one for specifically our community because we're, as everybody, our listeners know, we are in Florida, UF early. What is it, early action or early? It was early action.
Early action, non-binding.
Their first time doing it,
Correct.
UF, first time doing an early action. And the disappointment for so many was so prevalent. This is a school that parents who went there would say, I would never get in today. And now we have kids with high achievers with extremely high test scores, have all the rigor that were said that you're told you're supposed to have, and had flat out rejections. What are you seeing? What's going on?
First of all, let me say, when it comes to UF, I think we still have to wait until March and kind of let the dust settle after the regular decision come out, because there are a lot of high achieving students who were deferred, who I believe will still be admitted based on what UF is saying. Their deferral pool was relatively small. So I think a lot of those kids will still see a positive outcome, whether it's innovation, PACE, or Summer B. But that said, I know there were some really high achieving kids who got flat out rejections and were really disappointed. And I think there's a few factors that play here.
Okay.
One, from what we understand, UF actually over-enrolled their freshman class last year. So there's an algorithm, right, that colleges use when they're determining how many students to accept. How many do they think will then yield? That yield number is the number of accepted students who then turn around and enroll. A lot of times they get it right. They're pretty close. Some years, lots more students enroll. And then that hurts the subsequent class who's applying. So I think that was one of the factors.
So does that mean they accepted the same amount of students, but more said yes than they were anticipating?
Likely, yes, that is the case.
Okay.
So, which, it's not surprising. I mean, you look at the caliber of school, UF, it's, high in the rankings and it's such a prestigious school. And when push comes to shove, I think people say, wow, a free education, or spending 50 to 90, $100,000 a year, it just doesn't make sense. So I think that's one of the reasons. I also think, and I am not a fan of the U.S. News world ranking system.
Okay.
It's very flawed, and we could do a whole podcast on that. I won't bore you with all the details, except to say that it's a lot of subjective information that goes into the ranking systems. However, colleges use them, and I know that families and parents use them. And so I think as UF has climbed the rankings, it's become more and more popular. And even though we as a state set limits around the number of out of state students that can be admitted, it's a state limit of 10%. It's not a school limit. So I think that as UF has gotten more prestigious, they have gotten more out of state applications, and you know, they're accepting as many of those students as the state mandates will allow them to, because it generates more revenue. So I think those are a few of the factors that are impacting what's happening with UF. And not just UF, by the way, FSU as well, because FSU was very competitive this year also.
You just brought up something that I'm curious about. When you have out of state applicants, so now being in Florida, we have access to prepaid for those of you who don't know when you, and I just tell me if I'm speaking correctly about this, but you can buy different packages, one of them being you can pay for tuition when your child is born, and then that rate holds true for when your child is ready to go to college. Is that correct?
Correct. So you're locking in that lower tuition rate. So you can get a tuition package, or you can do tuition and dorm and fees. So there's several different packages, and you purchase it and lock in the rate, at whatever it is when you purchase that package.
So is it true or is it a myth that the state schools look at that to see if the applicant has that? It might be deterrent in their acceptance because they want the money maybe from an out of state school.
Is it part of their decision? Like, is that one piece?
I would say that that is mostly a myth, mostly.
Okay.
Because, and this is what's going on, not just with the University of Florida, but you look at Texas, you look at Michigan, you look at UNC Chapel Hill, right? All of these competitive public universities are there to serve the students in their state. That is their priority. UF, Florida State, UCF, these schools are here to serve Florida students. And so they're not going to be, on any grand scale penalizing students who have Florida prepaid. Now, that's not to say that it never comes into play, right? If you've got maybe a very borderline student and the school has a little bit more room for some out of state students, might they make that decision to go with an out of state? They may, but it's not really going to impact our students in any significant way.
All right. Well, that's good to know since we
Yes.
we're living in Florida.
I don't want to deter people from purchasing Florida prepaid, because it really is between Florida prepaid and Bright Futures. I joke that we have golden handcuffs in the state. We really do. It is hard to justify the expense to go elsewhere, because with Florida prepaid and Bright Future, and especially if your child were to get some scholarship money from a Florida school, your kid is actually making money.
Yeah, they're being paid to go to school. I know I have a friend from growing up that I went to college with, and she still, to this day, even though my kids are older now, like, she still doesn't understand. What do you mean your kid, like, you did not have to pay? Like, she cannot wrap her head around the whole Bright Futures concept. And I'm like, or that he got money in scholarships and we could use that for the dorm and apartment, right? Like, she cannot it just makes no sense. She's in the state of Illinois. So,
Okay, so I had a very personal experience with what we're talking about right now. I have 3 kids. One, my daughter was, and I had 3 very different application processes. My daughter was a musical theater kid. So her coach, her vocal coach at the time, worked with us to pick programs that fit her set of skills. And she actually ended up at Rollins College, doing a BA in theater. My middle guy is actually at UF for engineering. However, with his application process, he knew he wanted engineering. So we looked at schools based on their engineering programs and what else he wanted in a school. So most of his applications were out of state. However, when it came down to choosing a school for him, that we narrowed it down by all of his acceptances, UF being one of them, and then my husband took him to the out-of-state schools to look at. And when push came to shove, at the end of the day, there was no difference between going out of state in the engineering program and staying in state for the engineering program. There was no wow factor that said it's worth paying all this money to go out of state. And actually, on his last tour at an out of state university, the tour guide said my deciding factor was this is my state school.
Right.
But I couldn't see taking on all those loans, and thankfully, our son came to that decision on his own and said, "You know what? I think it makes more sense to stay in state and go to UF," which is where he ended up. And my 3rd child, who is a junior in high school right now, is an athletic
A
oh my god,
student
what's the
ath
word? Thank you.
student athlete.
Is a student athlete, so that's a whole 'nother process that we're going through right now. So, I guess my question for you at the end of all this is, how do you advise and when do you jump in and say, "Those are some great schools," but do you need to go out of state? Do you want to go out of state? Like, what's the driving force between helping kids get in out of state and staying in state? And is that a conversation that comes up for you all the time?
All the time, yes, and I think I always say to parents because I mean, it's kind of a joke, but not really, that I say, "Okay, parents, you pay my bill, but your child is my client." They really are. But I do say when we're talking about the college list that, parents have, final say on financial and geographic parameters. So we certainly have those conversations. We try to have them early. And a lot of times it's starting with just educating parents because a lot of parents don't know really what costs are in state versus out of state versus private, in state and out of state. So we start by kind of talking about and educating them on what those costs are. And then I also try to educate them on some of the costs that are not in the calculation for cost of attendance. Like it sounds silly, but I have 2 daughters and I know that if they went up north out of state, the wardrobing costs for boots and coats and all the sweaters would be a fortune. The airfare, that's not included in cost of attendance. So we talk about that. And then as we're building the college list, I ask parents to really think about what is the budget? Like what would you be willing to spend out of state? And I discourage them. And a lot of times they'll come back and they'll say, "Oh, we'll see. We'll see where he gets in. We might pay for this school, but that not that school." And I really try and discourage that. And I encourage parents to think about what the budget is and to communicate with your child. One of the value adds of working with an advisor is if a parent comes to me and says, "Okay, listen, we're going to apply in state. We have a budget of, I don't know, 35 or 40,000 though. We would be willing to spend that." An advisor, I've traveled to a lot of colleges. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence. Every year I gather data on where my students are getting scholarships, right? So we can at least work with families on crafting a college list that might meet their financial needs.
Mhm.
But, it's an ongoing conversation. And I will say the thing that has always been the most heartbreaking scenario to witness is when a family or a parent says, "Oh, we'll let him apply and then we'll sort of decide later." And then the kid gets into their dream school, let's say a Vanderbilt, which is going to be the first school that hits $100,000 a year. And the
Oh,
parent
wow.
says, "Oh, wait, wait, wait. I'm not doing that." Right. And, it's funny. I mean, I've had scenarios where I once had a student get into an Ivy League after the parent spent many, many years talking about how they would only pay for an Ivy League. And the kid finally got in, and the parent said, "I don't want to pay for that. You've got to talk him out of it." And I said, "I
Oh
can't
my
undo
gosh.
10 years of the brainwashing, right?" So
The promises you made.
right, but I think part of it and I hope that parents who are listening to this hear that your messaging matters, and talking to your kid in very realistic terms throughout high school or even maybe a little earlier, even if you're having college conversations in middle school and high school, really talking about more focus on the importance of making the most of your college experience wherever you are, talking about how taking out loans can really have an enduring negative impact on your adult life. And also, I think I often hear kids, I don't know how to say this, they sort of feel like if they can't go out of state, like it's a punishment, right? Oh, my parents won't pay for me to go out of state. I feel like I'm settling. No, not first of all, we have wonderful universities. But secondly, it's about making an important decision that is about setting you up for your future success and not, you know, not creating lots of debt in your life, not forcing your parents to put off their retirement for years. I mean, that is not a punishment. That should be a conversation. I think it's about establishing family values and communicating those values to your kid. If you're in a position to send your child out of state, that's wonderful. But if you're not, I think don't feel guilty about it and don't create a scenario where your child feels like it's a punishment or they're settling.
So, do you think this type of conversation would be best starting when the child is entering high school, maybe? Like, what is the good timing that parents should be aligned with each other and then having the communication with their son or daughter about future expectations? Is there a guidance on that?
Well, I think starting to have conversations, particularly if you're going to have sort of financial conversations, that's probably as your child gets into high school. But I would say even before that, being cognizant of the sort of implicit messaging. I laugh, but I have a very good friend who started she and her husband were Gators. So they started dressing their boys in Gator onesies when they were 6 months old. Well, guess what they conditioned their kids to think,
Sure. Yeah. Want to
right?
be a
It's whoever
gamer. Yep.
left. And I get it. They're proud of their alma mater. It's kind of dangerous nowadays because what I think families forget, and they'll come to me all the time and they'll say, okay, what can we do to get my kid into UF or into Michigan? And we talk about the factors that are controllable. So the classes they select, their rigor, how well they do in those classes, how much effort they put in, what activities they choose to get involved in. There's a lot that we can control. But there is a lot in this process that we don't have control over. And so putting all of this expectation and pressure on your children for an outcome that they do not have control over, at least not entirely, is, I think, part of the reason that it feels so stressful and so devastating to people because it's the lack of control. So I would say, having conversations earlier than high school about generally what is the purpose of college? What is the goal? College is about growing psychologically, socially, academically, like really helping your kids maybe see a bigger picture and not attaching a specific college name to that picture early on. I think is one of the best things that a parent can do to set their child up for success down the road.
When clients come to you and they say, "This is my dream school," are you like, "Oh," like, does it fill you with dread that they've been thinking about this for so long? And are there still and I'm just curious, I know when we started the process, we had reach schools, target schools, and safety schools. Is that even still a thing? Does that exist, that formula today?
I answer the first part of your question. Yes, when I have somebody come to me and say a UF is my dream school, depending on the caliber of student, or a
And
Duke or
right,
Harvard, right? I actually say, okay, I'm going to put my dream crusher hat on right now, and we're going to talk about the reality of this because that school has a 4% acceptance rate.
Right.
So we do have to have some hard conversations. But part of my job is to help them develop a college list that is where they hedge their bets. It's a robust list. It contains a lot of options that they are excited about. Sometimes it can be difficult to get them excited about other options. But what I find is once students start researching and they start seeing that, a lot of the same opportunities that I could have at Harvard, I can also have at a university of Wisconsin, or I can have it at a University of South Florida, right? It really is about introducing them to more information and trying to get them to keep an open mind, which is a really important life lesson. And so oftentimes I actually have to have that conversation about open-mindedness with the student and the parent. And, I remind parents, our children model our behavior. Part of, as a parent, what you can be doing is keeping an open mind, not, I hear this a lot. I'll be in a conversation about colleges and I'll mention a college to a parent and they'll say, "Oh, no, no, no. His friend so and so goes there and he wasn't that smart. So my son was not going to go there." I'm like, "Okay, well, every school has really smart kids and maybe some who we say, 'Oh, how did he get in?' But the minute you start shutting things down based on very limited criteria, you give your child permission to do the same thing." And in this day and age, with college admissions being, as we'll call it, tricky as it is, I think keeping an open mind is really important. With regard to that whole categorizing schools, reach, likely, target, we do still use that, but the model is a little muddier than it used to be because now you have schools that should be likelies. So, as I mentioned earlier, that concept of yield, that number is the number of students who are admitted who then enroll. That number is a big data point in the US News and World Ranking. So some colleges are very, very protective of their yield, which means they might not accept a high achiever because they think we're his backup school. And so he's not going to come. So we're not going to accept him. So that creates some challenges in creating a balanced college list. And then early decision really can factor in as well, because you might have a school that would be a reach school, except if you apply binding early decision, and then it becomes more of a target or a likely school. So there's lots of considerations. I think if you are creating a list of, let's say, generally, anywhere between 6 and 12 schools, depending on if you're applying in-state or in-state and out-of-state, and you're creating a balanced list, meaning you're looking at schools that have acceptance rates, varying. It may be very low acceptance rates for the reachiest schools, but then you add a few schools that have higher acceptance rates, you'll have yeses. And at the end of the day, the goal should be to strive for multiple yeses so your child thinks they have a choice and feels like they have a choice. That's the most important thing.
So, what happens when a student comes and is working with you, the family's working with you, and going through the process of selecting schools and best fit, and they come to a place where maybe they don't know if college is right for them, or they're not showing the motivation that's required to do this independently, which would then indicate their readiness for college. Do you do anything with that information?
We do. And I will tell you, we're seeing this more post COVID in the last couple of years than I've ever seen before. I think the cohorts coming up now, like this year, the next couple following years, were fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade during COVID, which were really important developmental years for executive functioning skills. So some of what you're describing, not there's the issue of maybe not being willing to do the work, not wanting to because they're not invested in attending college. And then there's kids who are really invested, but they're just struggling with, the organizational, the time management skills. It seems for a lot of these kids right now, like deadlines mean nothing because during COVID, they didn't mean that much, right? Teachers were really flexible with turning in assignments, and that's kind of continued even post COVID. So we actually have brought on a college coach and an executive functioning coach who is working with students on their transition to college, for students who are demonstrating some of those issues, but do want to attend college, are really motivated to do so. And I think you're seeing more and more of the college coaching appearing in the disability resource centers on college campuses, because this is quite a pervasive issue. The question of, whether or not you have a student or whether you have a student who really wants to attend college, that's a little bit more complicated. And I think that warrants a discussion about whether or not this is a kid who is really college material, because for some students, school is hard, and it may be a kid that just doesn't have it in them to do 4 more years of the academics. And then we try and work with parents on identifying some alternate opportunities. I have a student from last year who loved working with his hands, and he just was not very academic, and he actually decided to go the trade route, and he is doing incredibly well. I just ran into his dad, and he is so happy. And then sometimes it's just a matter of this kid being really burned out, and maybe they just need a gap year. And there are a lot of great programs, whether it's community service, study abroad, language immersion, even just getting a job for a year and working. And sometimes it's just a matter of doing that. And if that's the case, then we work individually with parents, because sometimes a student can actually continue their applications, and then depending on where they get in, they can defer admission for a year to take a gap year and to sort of figure things out. But it's coming up more often than it used to. And I think for parents who maybe grew up in a culture themselves or have always had a mindset that it's college or bust, that can feel really disappointing, really upsetting. But there's a lot of different paths that students can take. And interestingly, the number of students attending college, even though the most selective colleges are getting more selective, generally speaking, college admissions is on the decline. And it's actually the biggest population is white males right now. So I think
What did you say? White
the
males?
white males.
White males.
Yes, because there's a lot of question marks around, is it worth it to go into debt for a college degree when it doesn't seem to carry quite as much weight, or it's not necessarily quite as necessary for earnings over a lifetime as it used to be.
That's really interesting. I had seen that same statistic as well, because it's not that more people are applying to colleges, it's that more people are applying to the same colleges,
That is true.
and that the overall application rate is actually down.
And we don't hear much about it, where we are, but in smaller, more rural areas, there are colleges that are closing because they just don't have the enrollment that they used to have. But we don't feel that and we don't see that, because most of our students are, yes, applying to those same, maybe 150 colleges or so. And there it feels like the opposite is happening, which it is getting harder.
Yes. So that brings up another point. You had said earlier there are things we can control and things we cannot control. What are some of the things that we can control, and what should we be encouraging our kids to do while they're in high school?
So in terms of what we can control, some of what we've already talked about, the way we talk about college, the messaging, the making sure that we are getting kids are excited about what college is supposed to be about versus just the name of the school or where they're going. Beyond that, I always tell my students the best way to create a compelling application is to have the very best high school experience you can have. Living in the moment actually nets better results for the future, as opposed to thinking and doing everything as a line item on a resume, right? So, what that means is challenging yourself academically, a student challenging themselves academically, taking on as much rigor as they're able to manage without losing sleep, without melting down every day. I mean, I think this is really important,
Yeah.
but taking on that challenge and then finding a few things that you love to do that are meaningful to you. So a resume with 20 items isn't that impressive if all the student can say is, oh, I attended meetings, or I attended a 5K walk, once, and did a few hours here. It's about depth of involvement and commitment. So being able to really, as a student, articulate what you care about, the things that matter to you, where you've invested your time, that is much more compelling. And then the other thing that I would say is showing or engaging in some sort of curiosity about what's happening in the world. Maybe it's reading, maybe you love learning about baking. It doesn't matter what the topic is, but it's about, I think, engaging with what's happening around you and being able to show some connection to and some awareness of the world.
Can you give us an example of how that would show up on a college application? What are some things that kids can do to demonstrate that?
Well, I think sometimes it shows up in their writing and in their essays. I think it also can show up, like, I have a student, he is I mean, he loves to read. He probably, on top of all of his schoolwork, reads 2 to 3 books a month, and that's actually something he put in his activities because it's what he spends his time doing, and so it can show up in a variety of ways in the application. Sometimes it doesn't always have to be a structured activity too. It doesn't have to be a club necessarily. It can be, maybe I did some independent research. I mean, everybody talks about research, but maybe I did some independent research. I actually had a student a couple years ago who really wanted to learn sign language, and she basically taught herself from watching YouTube video. That was something she wrote about. It appeared in her application. She didn't do it in any sort of structured way, but it showed that she really enjoyed the process of learning. And I think that's something that's really different than just doing things to create a line item on a resume. That is showing me as an adult who's reading her application that who she is, what she's made of. It's a little bit about her character and the essence of her. And ultimately, that's what we're looking for. So I think choosing things that are authentically interesting to your child or to your student, it should be the goal. And that should be what the conversation is about.
Right. It's like learning what their passions are, encouraging a passion. And even if it's something completely different than what the parent envisioned for their child or what their interest would be, to really, right? Like it is so cool to see when your child has a strong passion that kind of came out of nowhere. And, that's what they should be showcasing.
Definitely. And it could be sports. I mean, I have my younger one was an athlete, and that was what her high school experience was, but she committed herself fully to it, which was great. I think I have students who are really into anime and even into video games. And you know what? If they love it and they're communicating with students internationally and they're investing their time and energy, there's always ways to showcase things in a positive light in the application. But it's really about encouraging your student to be authentically themselves and to invest in what matters to them.
So when you see that a school takes a holistic approach to looking at applicants, is this what they're referring to? Someone who's well-rounded and had different experiences?
I think holistic can be used in different ways for different schools. Generally speaking, yes, this is what we mean, that they're looking at the student in their entirety. So it's not just transcripts and test scores. It's looking at their essays, it's looking at their activities, it's looking at who they are as a person. How some schools use the term holistically, but it is a little bit more numbers focused. So, okay, so I'm sorry, can you ask the second part of your question?
If I can remember it.
I can relate to that.
I said, is this what was it 2 parts? I felt like, is this what is meant by a holistic approach, a well-rounded?
Oh, that was the point. Okay. So, what I wanted to say is colleges are not looking for well rounded students, they're looking for a well rounded student body. And that's a different thing.
Huh.
So, schools that or kids that are, do a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here sometimes are not as compelling as students who really show where their investment of time and energy is.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of parents know that, right? We hear the word well-rounded and we imagine that they need to be doing all these things.
Yes. And first of all, I think that's not even realistic because when you look at, especially for high achievers, the number of APs and ACE and dual enrollment, and then you want to put them in 20 different activities. And like, when is this poor kid supposed to sleep? Right. So that's why I say it's a handful of things that they do that they really enjoy and trying to find ways that they can maybe satisfy community service requirements. I just had a student in my office yesterday who is starting high school, and we were talking about how he might get his community service hours. He really likes sports. We talked about maybe working with some of the programs that allow you to work with special needs students and teaching them sports, or maybe, volunteer your time for one of the recreational leagues during tryouts, or volunteer coach a team. There's lots of different ways that you can add depth to your experiences and show engagement with things that are interesting to you.
Yeah, those
So
are some,
helpful.
yeah, great points there. I was just curious because, Jen, you mentioned all of these different classes, AP, ACE, dual enrollment. One of our listeners did want to know, is there a difference between an AP class, a dually enrolled class, or another program such as the ACE program? Do colleges look at those differently?
So ACE, AP, IB, dual enrollment, there are differences in the structures of those various curriculi. In terms of how they're viewed by colleges, I can tell you the Florida schools look at them all pretty similarly because they're all college level coursework. Out of state, it varies. So in Florida right now, we have the opportunity, our kids at many schools, to earn an ACE diploma. The ACE diploma, if you earn it, guarantees 100% bright futures, regardless of the test score. So there's value in doing it. Is it perceived the same way as AP out of state? It's weighted at many out of state schools, but it doesn't necessarily quite have the same traction as an AP class does. It may not transfer as readily for credit as the AP courses. However, I think it's got to be, a balance. And this is where maybe working with an advisor to understand how you might get ACE and AP into the schedule can be a good idea because if there's a chance your child's going to stay in state, you want to maximize their opportunity for bright future scholarships. Also, now because so many students are starting to take ACE, if high achievers don't incorporate at least some ACE classes into their schedule, they won't be able to keep up from a weighted GPA and a rank standpoint with other students who are taking ACE because there just aren't enough AP classes offered to young students. So I think for our Florida kids in public schools, if there's an opportunity to take some ACE classes and potentially pursue the diploma, I think it's worth doing or at least seriously considering. And colleges, though, our colleges do not have a preference for AP versus ACE.
And what about AP versus dual enrollment for out of state?
Well, what I always say about dual enrollment is it should not replace core classes. You can supplement what you're doing with dual enrollment, but colleges know that generally speaking, dual enrollment is a little easier than AP and it's not standardized. Like AP is a standardized curriculum. So they know if I see a 4 on an AP exam, I know what that means, right? Whether the kid is from Florida or from California. Dual enrollment, they don't have that benefit. So I understand why people choose to take dual enrollment. One, whether it's just to bolster rank in a public school, or two, to introduce your kid to true college classes. I think those are both valid reasons, but you should be supplementing what is available in school, not substituting as a general rule.
That's a good rule of thumb. All right. Well, we have had so much information thrown at us and at our audience. Any last
Valuable information.
Yes. So helpful. So, Jen, if people are listening and have, well, I should say, people are listening when they have questions and would like to reach you, what is the best way to reach you?
So on our website, Milestone College Prep, there is an email. You can send the emails and they get routed to me or sometimes to one of the other advisors, and we will be happy to respond. If somebody is kind of thinking about using a college advisor, maybe not sure, is this the right path for me? Our advisors actually do meet and greets with families, which are complimentary. So we can, you can get an opportunity to meet an advisor, ask questions, better understand the process, and better understand the value that we bring to the process. Because I know it's complicated and I know it feels stressful, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be.
So I'm just curious, given what I told you my background was with my kids, does Milestone offer different counselors for different students? So if you have a student like my son who was looking for engineering programs or a musical theater kid or an athlete, do you have counselors who specialize in different areas?
Yes, definitely, because and I give you a lot of credit because those are completely different animals. Like
Oh my
musical
gosh.
theater is a whole different animal from athletics. So, yes, we do have advisors who understand each of those unique processes, and we will pair families up accordingly. Yeah.
This was amazing.
Thank you so much for being with us. If you know someone who has a child getting ready for college, please share this episode with them. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It was so nice talking with the two of you and your audience.
And remember, listen and share. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to this episode of Parent Coaches Unleashed with Carrie and Jessica. Together, we can raise the next generation of independent, capable, and compassionate young adults.
We encourage you to send us an email with questions and feedback to info@parentcoachesunleashed.com. Please remember, you are not alone on this parenting journey.